first of all, I appreciate you like having this conversation, and much less like hosting someone that you probably don't agree with on everything.
Well, Sam invited you to do that.
I was like, Casey, you're probably going to hate me for this, but
awesome.
I want to talk to this guy. I told him about it after it was confirmed. So
at some point, I'll invite like Sean Hannity's son on here, and Sam will have to sweat it out.
Well, I hope you'll invite me back. I think that could be a good time.
Welcome to Growing Up Christian. I'm Casey.
And I'm Sam.
And so the other day, I've been sitting on this story for a minute because I feel like this is something, I don't know, it just pulled a lot of strings in my brain when it happened. But so I've been getting my hair cut at this place in Wichita. I've decided that I can afford to pay a little more for people who have seen like a modern haircut before.
Yeah, right. That getting a haircut and finding the right place was like a real struggle for me. I had dreads for like 9 years and I didn't get a haircut for at least 10. And then after getting a haircut, I was like, after cutting them off, it was like after my son was born, I was like, what do I do? Like, I went from having an emo swoop to growing my hair out and getting dreadlocks. So like, I didn't know how to have an actual grown-up haircut.
Dude, you just like so many years where your hair was your personality too.
Yeah, I know. You have no idea how difficult of a time this still is for me, Casey. I still like have panic attacks over haircuts. I'm like, it's not right. It's not what I wanted. Hence becoming a hat guy.
Dude, as problematic as they were, you looked really good in dreadlocks.
Yeah, I miss them. I would redo them too, man. I would redo them in 2 seconds if my wife wouldn't divorce me and my company wouldn't consider why they hired me in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, what's the difference, right? You just smell like a hay barn all the time. That's it.
They weren't that bad, but they did dude, when I cut them, I should post the pictures on the Instagram. When I cut them off, like the dread rot, which is what they call it, when like all the shit builds up inside of them, it looks pretty fucked up. I should post those on the Instagram.
Oh my God. I'm not familiar at all with that. What do you got, like termites or something living in there?
Well, I mean, all your dead skin cells, everything, literally, like all your dead hair, like your hair never well, the dead hair is fine because they make wigs out of other people's hair. Like nothing happens to your hair.
Right.
Hair apparently stays hair forever. It doesn't decompose when your body does. That's why you see those like skeletons with like the creepy ass hair coming out. Like they still have like their head, like their scalps on and shit. But yeah, it's like, your hair grease and your dead skin cells, like that literally just builds up inside of them.
It's like when a tree cracks and falls over and you look inside and it's just like straight up mush in the middle and you just didn't know it.
Yeah. That's basically dreadlock.
Yeah. You got a gooey, a soft candy core.
Yeah. But anyway, okay. So you get your hair, you finally start paying big boy dollars for a haircut. Is this a salon or a barber?
No, it's like a salon. It's and it's like the cost of your haircut is inversely related to the age of the person cutting the hair. It's like the exact opposite of every other industry. Like the younger they are, the more you're going to pay for the haircut. I suppose unless you're one of those people that goes to the Paul Mitchell school and lets them just like hack away at you.
Yeah.
Like Edward
we have
Scissorhands.
Rob Roy's. Do you have Rob Roy down there?
No.
So Paul Mitchell, Rob Roy. Apparently they named these hair schools after just people with generic ass names.
The whitest dudes. So I've been going to this place and it's like takes a little longer, you end up in the chair for longer and then they like shampoo you out and stuff like that. But I got to talking to this young girl who's cutting my hair and just like asking her some basic questions, and well, what's a So are you from here? Yeah, originally. Okay. What about your fiance? And she's like, well, it's it's not my fiance. Well, it's kind of my fiance. Um, I think it's my fiance as of last night. I'm like, okay. What do you mean? She's like, well, we'll probably be married within the year. I was like, I gotcha. How did that happen? She's like, well, it came up in conversation last night. Like he told me that my ring would be here soon, and he asked me if I wanted him to ask me sooner or like wait a little while and ask me after a while. Like, well, first red flag right there. Like you don't get to probe. You gotta shoot your shot, boy. You know.
Yeah.
But it was funny because it was like the more questions I start asking, oh, what's your fiance do? He's a children's pastor. Oh, okay. Like where at? And she's like, well, it's at a church plant in downtown Wichita.
Nice.
Okay, church plant. She's like, yeah, he's not full time. He's a bank teller, but he hopes that they're gonna start paying him to do it soon. And the more she told me about this church, it sounds like it's kind of a cool place. They're meeting in like a communal space, and it's just it's very community focused. Like they're trying to like do a bunch of stuff in the community and like serve local people, which I think sounds great.
It made you almost consider going back to church.
Yeah, sure. Okay. But I'm like, so how long you guys been together? And she says 5 months.
Heyo.
It's like, oh, I've read this story before. Like she goes, well, but we were like aware of each other on social media and stuff beforehand.
That counts.
Yeah, pretty much.
That counts for like what? I mean, at least another 5 months.
This is all like how I started out, I literally saw April on campus and thought she was good looking, and so I just messaged her. I was like, hey, you should check out my band sometime.
Oof.
It's terrible.
Nice move. It worked, but I mean, it shouldn't have. You should be single and sad right now.
Right. Yeah. But you know what? Don't fix what's not broken.
Yeah.
But so they started basically like met in person. Like I'm assuming it sounded like 6 months ago. Started dating 5 months ago. Talking about marriage now, and
Oof.
It's one of those things where it's like people do that and they're fine, and like I certainly wouldn't presume to judge this girl or her fiance or their situation, and I wish them all the best. But it was just like there were so many of the things that like she said while telling me about this that I was like, oh yeah, I thought that, or I heard that before, or something. Like she says, well, I just feel like I matured a lot faster than a lot of my friends.
Oh my God. The amount of times I heard that from everyone who was getting married. Okay. From someone who got married at a young, we will talk about this all day. We were those people too.
We were.
Now, I, to some degree, will stand by the fact that I don't know if mature is the right word, but I was more ready for that stage of life at an early age. I don't think mature is the right word, but I was just I don't know. I wasn't interested in like, we weren't, both of us, like we weren't party guys. We had like a small group of friends that we were close with. Like not a lot was like changing for us, and we weren't always looking for like the next best thing. Oh, I don't know, maybe someone else will come along. Like we were just like easy go. I don't know. I shouldn't speak for you, but I was just not interested in like.
But I don't know if that's maturity. I feel
that's
like
what I'm saying. I'm not saying I was more mature. I'm saying my demeanor and general baseline personality that I have no control over was more ready for that phase of life at that time than peers.
I feel like I was less mature than most of the people around me. I just didn't like me getting married. I wasn't giving up anything that I wanted, and was like I wasn't sacrificing the life that I had hoped for or wanted so that I could marry April.
Yeah.
Like I
That's a
wanted
really
to
good way to
marry
put it.
April, but like I was a child and she was a child, and we were uh, only equipped to make each other miserable over time. And we did fine. We're fine. But yeah, there was just like so many little things that she said. I'm like, oh man, this is like talking to 22-year-old me.
Yeah,
You know?
man. I also want to point out how you were the one probing for conversation from the person cutting your hair, and it's supposed to be the other way around. You should
Well,
have.
everybody wants to talk about themselves. Like if you ask a question, shortly soon after, people are going to start talking about themselves.
Yeah, that's true. I think the hardest part about getting a haircut for me is when people try to talk to me. I'm like, I just would rather. I don't really want to do this. I want you to cut my hair. I want to say that looks good, or a little bit off, a little bit shorter right there, and then I want to pay you and move on. Like I know some people have like connections with their barber, and they like that. I don't. I don't care about that at all. And the small talk of like, so what do you got hobbies? It's like, yeah, I got hobbies. Yeah, so what do you? If I wanted to talk about them, I would have started talking about them.
I feel like I can handle the haircut place. I don't like it when the dentist tries to talk to me. Like they've
Oh
got
my
my
god!
they've got their fingers in my mouth and they're asking me questions, and I'm like, like
Yeah,
even yes or no questions. Like, what's the point? Like, I literally fell asleep in the dentist chair getting a filling the other day. I almost
I
broke
want to
my
point out that the dentist isn't. Well, the dentist is doing fillings. If you're getting your teeth cleaned, it's a hygienist.
Wow.
Come
Oh,
on, Casey.
all right. Well, sorry.
I get my mother-in-law is a hygienist, so she cleans my teeth. So I have to do the whole like her talking to me while cleaning my teeth and just be like her, and it's like and then now it's your mother-in-law. Imagine that. Isn't
And
that weird?
every time after you swish and spit, you're like, you're not a dentist. Yeah, that would be a little uncomfortable, I guess.
It's not anymore. It's just like that's just that it's like it is weird though because it's like outside. It's like I live right down the street from my mother-in-law, so like I see my wife's family all the time, and but it's also weird because I forget to go. Like you're supposed to go like what twice a year or some shit.
Yeah.
Uh, I'll definitely go over a year and then go in, and it's like then I have to like. It's like my mother-in-law knows when I'm not going because she's the hygienist who cleans my teeth. So it's like super weird when you go. It's like normally like haven't been in here in a while, and then it's just like having that conversation with your mother-in-law is like, yeah.
Dude, you know what I hate is like going to places where you are at a disadvantage in the discussion and then having them try to like upsell you stuff. Like the vet is really bad about that.
Oh my
Like,
god.
and then
Yeah.
the other like the dentist, I've been to the dentist like 3 times in the past year for different things.
And they're like, we
And
can fill 2 cavities. Do you want 3? You have 3 cavities. 4?
well, like the first time I went in the past year, they're like, "Hey, just so you know, we're seeing some signs that like you grind your teeth, and that can be really bad for your teeth over time. And we would really like to fit you for a night guard and like get you fitted for that. And it's $800 for the fitting and stuff like that. But this is something that would really be a good idea for you." And I'm like, I don't want, I don't want that. I do not want to have to sleep with that thing in. I would rather just pretend this problem didn't exist, you know? And the whole time I'm kind of thinking in the back of my head, like, no one's ever mentioned this to me before. So I told them, like, I didn't really want to. I wasn't going to do it. I've been back twice, and they haven't said a thing about me grinding my teeth or anything like that. And maybe I just got a check mark next to my name as like, oh, this guy's cheap and he doesn't buy night guards. But I feel like if it was really important, they would tell me on a regular basis, like, hey, just so you know, you're grinding your teeth down to the nub.
Yeah. That's always I'm always skeptical of those kinds of solutions when they're like, we're seeing signs of, it's like, I'm either doing it or I'm not. Okay. Your job is to look at my mouth and know if there's a problem. If you're just like making guesses based on a couple of things, like that's called data. So next time I come in, collect more of that, and then we'll see if I need this mouth guard a little bit later on.
I'm just gonna make my own by like melting down Jolly Ranchers, you know.
Perfect. I can't see anything go wrong with that.
Do you remember when you were a kid and they had all those? I don't even know if they still have them, but they had all those like weird candies that no one ever bought next to the cash register. They'd have like candy toothpaste that had like a little brush with it and stuff.
You would squirt like that weird like candy gel out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just like straight up sour like drops that you just put in your mouth.
Oh yeah, man, I remember those.
It just
I
burn
never
a
cared
hole in
about
your
sour
tongue.
stuff like that. Those were awful. Anything sour like that, would just like sour warheads made it felt like somebody sandpapered the fuck out of your tongue. It was awful. It felt awful. I hated anything sour. Or did you ever get those like giant ass, like the jawbreakers? Like they were
I don't
like
know
the
if I
size of
ever
a.
did. I feel like
Okay.
that's one candy that like I have no experience with. That, and I have one experience with gumdrops. I threw a threw them up naturally.
But these jawbreakers are so big, like you have to like you just lick them. Like you just hold like it's like holding like a cue ball and just licking it like a pervert. And you do it so
like
long though. you do it so long that like all the color is gone, right? And then you, as you're licking it, you realize it's just getting red. And you're like, what the fuck? And then you realize it's because your tongue's bleeding all over the thing. They were terrible.
You got one of those big, you know, sugary gonads that makes my mouth bleed, please.
Yep. Oh my god.
Dude, so are you fully vaccinated now?
Mm-hmm. I am. I can now rejoin the public without any worry, except for I love it because, like, you know, I'm fully vaccinated without a lot of the perks of being fully vaccinated, right? Because nobody knows, like, if you are, so like you still wear a mask so you don't look like a dickhead. I do. Other people don't care about looking like a dickhead, and I have seen a lot of those people. Literally, I swear, the day after, like, the CDC was like, you don't have to, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear masks. Everyone who wasn't vaccinated was like, we're not going to find out now. And I go to, like, just the other day, I went to like a gas station, go inside to get like, I get gas station iced coffee. Cumbies, we got Cumbies in New England. Cumbies is the best. Dollar iced coffees. Anyway, you go in, I'm like, there's, up until that point, I would generally, no matter what people's political leanings, you would, and you can know people's political leanings without talking to them because they're probably wearing like an American flag shirt with a bald eagle like silhouette on it and shit like that. Like, there's plenty of ways to know where I live what people's political leanings are without ever having a conversation with them. And they would even wear masks. And then all of a sudden, like, that switch flipped. And now we're in this like don't ask, don't tell policy of being vaccinated, I guess. And they're just walking around without masks, getting coffee, coughing on your cups, sneezing on the sugar cube. It's like the table with all the everything on it. It's like the creamer, sugar. It's like they're just like, it's like, God, I don't even care if I'm vaccinated. I'm getting COVID. But anyway, fully vaccinated. Interesting story though. While I was like, I had to stand in line to get my first shot, and nobody there knew how a line worked. So I stood there for longer than I needed to before realizing that the people standing in front of me didn't know why they were standing in line. I was there for like 40 minutes. That's the last time I ever just get in a line because I see it formed and somebody tells me what it's for. I'll go check that shit out for myself for the rest of my life. So I'm standing in line. I'm like 2 people from getting inside the store, so I'm pretty close to the front door where the handicap parking spots are. And it looks like a delivery van, like your 15 passenger type, all white, no windows on the sides kind of deal delivery van. And it's idling, and it's pulled into a parking spot that's right next to the handicap spot. But the back of the van is like maybe a foot over the line on the back. And this woman comes marching up beside me and turns into the parking lot and pounds on the guy's door. And she's like, "Are you handicapped?" And he's like, "What?" She's like, "Are you fucking handicapped?" And he's like, just rolls his window up. She's like, "You shouldn't be parked here. My 90-year-old mother had to walk into the CVS because assholes like you are parked where they shouldn't be." And she's really losing her shit. So he just rolls his window up, throws it in reverse, backs out, because that's what a normal person does. And had he known and had that conversation happened ahead of time, he would have just backed out. Like, she could have just like pulled in next to him and been like, "Excuse me, you're over the line," and he would have moved, and then she could have parked, and her 90-year-old mother wouldn't have had to walk 1.5 miles uphill in the snow to get to a fucking CVS.
Yeah, so he wasn't parked in the handicap spot. He just a crappy parker.
Yes, exactly. And he was idling. He was clearly waiting for something. Like, it's not like he left his vehicle. So anyway, after trying to lecture him, she turns around and trips over the shit that like stops your car from rolling forward in a parking spot and just eats shit on the pavement in front of everybody.
Just instant karma.
Oh yeah. And I felt the wind of her fall. It was just, she collapsed in front of me. I was 1.5 feet away from her, and you like do this whole like, you try to put your arms out, but within a pretty short period of time, like in between her falling, you put your arms out and you're like, I feel like if I catch her, I'm just going to make this worse. And I don't know if I could have caught her, but that was what made me scared.
So you just kicked her away.
Yeah, I just was like, you just watch it. Like, I don't think I was really able to react as much as I was thinking about it. Like, my arms weren't moving. It wasn't an involuntary reaction, but I'm like, I probably could have stopped that. And then she's mad at this guy in the van. Like, if I touched her, she would have blamed her fall on me. But then she just gets up and turns around and throws up her middle fingers at the guy in the van and starts like yelling at him. She's like, "Look what you just made me do, you asshole!" And then like stomps her way into the store, and everyone's just staring. And there's at least 10 people outside just quietly standing by while that whole thing happens. It was weird.
Oh man. Dude, that is the worst. Like, that's one of the few times I've ever like gotten like snotty with somebody in public, is because they were doing something like that. Because like yeah, like there's a way to handle that situation, right? The guy parked poorly. You have a handicapped mother. I'm assuming she was with her. She wasn't just talking about it, right?
Yeah, because she left. She had to like leave, and everyone was still there watching her leave. And she did come out, like she pulled the car up, and then her mother got into the car. Her mother was old. Like, she really shouldn't have been walking that far to get in. But there was clearly a way to have handled that didn't require, like, why not make that scene, or even if you're going to make that scene, why not like have that conversation with a person before driving to the opposite end of the parking lot and making your mother walk in? Like,
right.
You could have just pulled up next to the dude and been like, "Hey, I can't fit," and he would have just moved. It was weird, man.
Like, "Look, Mom, you got to walk because I've got a point to make."
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm using you as credentials so I can freak out right now.
Yeah.
So that was like, I don't know. I have like very little sympathy for people who do that sort of thing to other people in almost any context. You know, like, everybody's like, "Hey, don't talk like that to your waiter or waitress or whatever." But
yeah,
there's so many situations where people are like, you can see there's like a gleam in their eye where they're like, "I have the justification to act like a total jerk right now, and I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna enjoy it," you know? And like, I just don't. just don't do that. Like, I just don't understand why people do that. But one time, so I traveled for my company all over the U.S. and a little bit internationally, not much, for like 3 years. And you just end up stuck in airports. Like, you're going to. You travel enough. If you fly, 6 times a month, you're going to get stuck once in a while. Things are going to happen. You're going to get delayed. And like, there's two kinds of people. There's the vast majority of people that are upset, but they just kind of deal with it. And then there's the people who are like, maybe if I yell enough, I'll get faster. Maybe they'll charter me a private plane to take me to Dallas or whatever. And so there was this one trip where I was coming back from New Orleans, and I had to go to Atlanta and then go back to Wichita, because that's how flights work here. So I get to Atlanta, just normal, everything's fine, and Delta got hacked. It was like a big ordeal. They shut down flights all over the country for I don't know how long time. Anyways, you're stuck, and there's so many things that it interferes with on the airport side of things that they don't have any control over, So we wait around for like 6 hours. The plane that we were supposed to fly on wasn't getting there, so they had to get us a different plane. By the time they got us the plane, the pilots that we had, they're too close to their hourly limit to make the flight, so they're just one thing after another. So we end up getting on the plane. It was supposed to leave at like 6 p.m. and it's like midnight now. And we're about to make our 3.5 hour flight to I guess whatever it was. Anyways, we get on the plane. We wait on the tarmac for it was a long time. I remember I watched an entire movie while we were waiting on the tarmac.
Oh my God, that's so frustrating though, to have to just sit there that long.
It was like Batman, the Killing Joke. I don't remember much about it. But anyways, we take off finally. We fly like an hour, and there's something wrong with the plane. So
come on.
They have to turn us around and take us back to Atlanta.
No.
Yeah,
that's so terrible.
It was awful. It was like the worst case scenario. It was like an overnight ordeal, But anyways,
everyone on the plane thinks it's only happening to them and nobody else on the plane.
Oh yeah, and there's this couple. It's like middle-aged couple. And immediately, like, they're making it clear that they are going to get a special deal out of this. And it's going to include an apology from the CEO of Delta.
Oh my God.
I mean, literally just freaking out on the plane. Then we get off the plane. Everybody has to deboard, where there's 250 people standing there that just got off of this plane. Everybody's exhausted, and they're just waiting to hear what they're going to do for us, right? And this couple is standing at the desk, and they are just screaming at the girl at the desk. And she's just a salaried airport employee, just there trying to figure it out like everybody else,
Right.
And this couple is just lambasting her. I mean, going to town on her, making a scene. And then the pilots and the flight attendants, they're up against their hours, so they have to leave. And so they come out of the plane and they run to the gate and yell at the pilots and the flight attendants as they're getting off the plane. You told us we would be in blah, blah, blah by now. And, blah, just screaming at them and stuff.
Oh my God.
And so we're waiting around, and they're standing in the back, just kind of like muttering to themselves really loud for the whole crowd to hear. It's like the people who are trying to rally the crowd with them. Yeah. Like they're kind of like elbowing everybody around them, like, this is crazy. I mean, have you ever seen such a thing? And this lady came down to like announce what was going on, and these people keep screaming over us. And finally, like, they were standing right behind me, and I'm trying to remember what I said. I had a really good line, but I was like, why don't you shut up, you prick? We're all waiting. Shut your mouth. And it's like the one time I've ever yelled at someone, and it was like it caught them by surprise so much that they just kind of like, and they were still obnoxious, but they didn't scream at anyone from there forward, and it felt like so good. Like all the times I didn't try in high school basketball, it was like, man, this is what it must have felt like.
Oh my God. I don't ever have it in me to call people out. I think I'm scared for my personal safety or something. Like, you have to, I don't know. I mean, you get to a tipping point, obviously, if it's going on for a long time, but to think about just trying to call somebody out for being a dick like that for that long. I mean, maybe after like all that time and the flight and everything just going wrong for that many hours, like I'm surprised everyone there didn't just like turn in on them and cannibalize them.
Right? Just stomp them to death right in the tarmac. Yeah, it was bad, but like that's a good instinct to have. Like, I don't know, we were having a conversation this week about a person that was, everybody knows, especially if you're a guy, like you've got that guy in your life that always wants to tell you about the last time they got in a fight.
Oh yeah.
And I hate it so much when a grown man starts telling me a fight story. I just want to like walk off in the middle of it. Like, shut up. Like, what is wrong with you? Like, if you're getting in fist fights as a grown man, like you're doing it wrong. All of it. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah. I know. It's strange when you hear people, and there's always a pride in it. Like that's cool. Like you beat someone up. I don't know. I don't think this isn't MMA. Like you don't get a trophy. You might get a, I don't know, criminal charge possibly. But
and you can really hurt somebody. You know, like somebody falls and hits their head. I mean,
maybe because I'm the kind of person who would have lost every fight they could possibly get into. But maybe that has something to do with the fact with why I've never understood the mentality of people who get in fights. Like that, if for your reaction to be that, even like when you're young and like usually there's alcohol involved with most fights. I feel like I don't. If there isn't, then those are the kind of people you need to be probably scared of, like really scared of. If someone's going to kick your ass without like any alcohol in their system, like, ooh, like, I don't know. That's scary, but
don't be
like
around
college fights, bar fights. Like, man, I just can't even ever imagine getting into one of those. I would have backed down so quick. And the second anyone came out, I was just like, oh, when you think of the type of person whose response to, you want to fight is to throw a punch. Like there's something that's like in your brain that just like turns off, like for you to not be able to like consider the consequences of that. It's really interesting to me.
Yeah. It's hard to know, like in those situations, and like fighting aside, just like intervening in a situation or like speaking up when someone's doing something. Like, I don't know. There's certain circumstances where you should, right?
Of course.
Like somebody recently, I think it was, what was it? Talk purity to me. She was talking about being at like the drugstore and someone just like bothering her, like some creepy old dude just bothering her, and like, do you intervene in that situation? I mean, you should, right? Verbally. So I don't know. It's hard. I don't feel like I've been in very many situations though where it was bad enough that like it was like my duty to stand in and say something. I just don't think that you do end up in many of those. But if it happens, I guess, that's what you need to do.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the amount of whenever a fight breaks out or you see something wild, there's always like a dozen people standing around videotaping the whole thing, and but no one's going to get involved. Like they're just going to post that shit on YouTube and try to go viral. Try to make some money off this.
I'm not fighting anybody, but I won't rule out the possibility of berating someone.
Yeah,
if they really have it coming.
Yeah, man. All right. So we're kind of, I guess we're at that point where we should introduce our guest coming up.
Probably.
So our guest Coming up today, as the title of the show implies, is Shane Claiborne. If you are not familiar with Shane Claiborne, he is an author. He is an activist. Some of his books include The Irresistible Revolution, Jesus for President, and his most recent one, which is kind of the meat of what we get into in the conversation, is a book called Beating Guns, where he talks about I guess just gun violence in the United States and ways to curb it, and where we're at as a culture, as a gun culture, or as a culture that's having a very difficult time finding a way to have productive conversations about gun violence and how to mitigate it. So I think this is a great conversation. This might be one of the few we've had at this point where we're not all on the same page here. There's some differences of opinion on what this looks like, and they're not so vast, but Casey and I don't necessarily agree all the way on this, but there's a lot of overlap. So I like this conversation. It's not an easy one to have, but I think just the fact that people who have differences of opinion can get together and have this conversation is what we want to see more of in our worlds, and even in our own lives. It's not easy to have these conversations with maybe family or friends that disagree. So I appreciate it. I thought it was not only fun, but a good exercise in just having conversations that might not be easy. So
Yeah. I guess we get into it in the episode, but I have been a gun enthusiast for, most of my life. And I feel like there's a bunch of people in the audience that are gun enthusiasts, and a lot of people who are not. I think either way, what we're trying to do, both in this podcast and another one that we just did a guest spot on, is come together on the issues, the things that we think we've got common ground on. We may not agree on exactly the minutia of what guns should be legal and which ones shouldn't and all of that stuff. Sometimes Sam try to tread on me and I'm like, don't, no step on snake. But, I think that there's a lot of common sense stuff that we can come together on, and it's not going to fix every problem out there, and there's still going to be loopholes and stuff like that. But the idea that like any sort of action is of negative consequence to gun owners, I think is ridiculous. It's in everyone's best interest to try to find a way to curb some of the stuff that's been going on, whether it's mass shootings or just like the more traditional gun violence and stuff. If you're a gun enthusiast, like, think of it this way: those things are the greatest threat to guns ownership. That's what I feel like I've tried to like communicate to some of the people that I know that are very, very wary of any discussion of these topics, is like, if you are really interested in protecting gun rights, quote unquote, whatever that means to you, like mass shootings and violence and stuff like that, that's the greatest threat. Anything that us as law-abiding people, gun owners or not, can do to help curb some of that, even if it doesn't fix every little thing about it, I think it's in all of our best interests long term for us to do that. So I did, hey, I just want you guys to know, I did make my best effort to read Shane's book. I made it through about 60% of it. So
that's good. I mean, getting through 60% of a book for an interview is impressive, Casey.
It's exponentially better than my record previously. I'm not reading the Bible though. So,
well, luckily we're not interviewing God about that. So,
anyways, Shane's a great dude. We don't, like I said, we don't agree on everything, but just a really gracious, compassionate guy with the best of motivations, and is just a really good dude to talk to. So
yeah.
If this is an uncomfortable conversation for you as a gun owner or something, just stick with it and just, just hear him out and some of his ideas on these things. And I think that that's ultimately like where we need to go with things, is just a better, more open conversation. So enjoy our talk with Shane Claiborne.
Hey everybody, we're back with our guest Shane. Shane, thanks so much for hanging out with us.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, fellas. I'm glad to have a conversation.
Yeah. So Shane, just for our listeners who might not be familiar with you or your work, I was introduced to it when I was in college with your book, The Irresistible Revolution. And that was really pretty foundational to me as I was trying to figure out what I thought being a Christian meant and things like that. So I find your story fascinating. I think a lot of people would. I would like you to just kind of give a quick backdrop into, who you are and how you kind of got into the work that you're doing today, with the Simple Way and things like that, like how you drifted into a line of work that's not entirely common.
Yeah. Well, so I grew up down south. That's why I got the nice Southern drawl going. And I grew up in Tennessee, fell in love with Jesus down here. I grew up in the United Methodist Church, and then I got a little bored with it and I dove into the Pentecostal thing, and I like that, and I've kind of been spitting out the bones all along the way, but taking what I could, and it's shaped me, and it's a little town I grew up in down here in Tennessee. So I always had this sort of curiosity and even kind of a longing to see the world bigger than that, so I went to school up in Philly, little college, Eastern University, and that's where I studied. I like how Karl Barth said we need to read the Bible in one hand, but we need to read the newspaper in the other, right? So that our faith doesn't just become a ticket into heaven and an excuse to ignore the world that we live in right now. So I really loved studying the Bible and studying sociology in college. But really the life-changing moment for me was when we were in undergrad. I was studying there in the suburbs of Philly, and we heard about a group of homeless families that had moved into an abandoned Catholic church building. And these are literally moms and dads on the waiting list for housing. And as we read the newspaper article about it, it said that they were given an eviction notice by the Catholic Church, and if they weren't out within 48 hours, they could be arrested. And that's one of those things that like, man, something about that just doesn't feel right, and so it really organized a student solidarity movement, and I was a part of that. We basically moved in as much as we could in solidarity with those families, and that standoff didn't just last 48 hours. It lasted for months and months. Many of them got housing, and out of that we started our community. Man, this is 25 years ago, so how about that? And
wow.
But we moved into that same neighborhood, and we started the Simple Way, the community I've been a part of for the last 25 years, which is really inspired by these families, but also inspired by the early church in the book of Acts, where it says, that the early Christians shared everything they had. No one claimed any of their possessions were their own. And, they lived the gospel out of their homes. And so we were really drawn to that. So we started this little village, and we've got community gardens, murals, all kinds of stuff, going in the neighborhood, still taking abandoned houses and fixing them up. And then, out of living there, a lot of my the sort of fire in my bones on some of these other issues surfaced out of seeing too many kids killed on our street corners, and wanting to do something about gun violence. But not just that. I mean, we have a whole movement around welcoming immigrants in Philadelphia we've been a part of. We've been trying to fight for restorative justice and alternatives to the death penalty. And all that's fueled by my faith, but it's also fueled by my proximity, that like the neighborhood that I'm living in. A lot of these issues have names and faces. They're not just ideologies,
Yeah. It seems like the past 4 years have probably made a little bit more work for you in terms of like conversations being had about it seems like everything that you're working for has been, those are the conversations that have been prominent in the news over the past 4 years. Even though they were always issues, certain things brought to light other
where we really stand and where things have been and or where they're going or where we want them to go in regards to immigration, gun violence, the death penalty. All of those have been really prominent conversations.
Absolutely, dude. I mean, and some of these are not partisan, I mean, we're right now having deep conversations with the current administration under Biden because his refugee numbers of welcoming refugees are lower than Trump's. They're historic lows, lower than any modern presidency. And so we're trying to, to me, welcoming immigrants, welcoming refugees is not a Republican thing or a Democrat thing. It's a Jesus thing. Jesus said, when you welcome the stranger, you welcome me. So, that's, and same with the death penalty. Joe Biden used to be for the death penalty. Now he's come out against it. So I'm optimistic that he can make some changes on that. But a lot of this is state by state too. So it's not just all change doesn't happen from the top down. It really comes from the bottom up. So we've been building momentum. But certainly, these Trump years have been devastating because I think, what I've been saying is Trump didn't change America. He revealed America. And I think the same's true of the evangelical church, especially, white evangelicalism. He didn't change it. He really revealed it to us. And, I remember when Trump was first elected, my wife was asking her third graders, she's a, educator, and she was asking her third grade students, what do you think of? How are you processing this? And the kids said, these are some of the real things that they said. Are we going to be slaves again? Is my family going to have to move back to Puerto Rico? Is my friend Muhammad, who's Muslim, going to be allowed to stay in this country? So I think that was initially what we heard and saw. And so, over the years, we've been trying to respond to that. But I think it's also the kind of meshing of Christianity with the ideologies and rhetoric of Trump that's been so disturbing. So, yeah, I'm not partisan.
Yeah.
I wrote a book called Jesus for President that's challenging where we put our hope and our faith. And so I find it just absolutely baffling that many of my fellow evangelicals have kind of forfeited any credibility to try to defend things that are not only indefensible, but they're very anti-Christian, anti-Christ-like.
On your refugee project, do you where are a lot of the refugees coming from right now that you guys are lobbying for?
Well, there's folks from all over, there's folks that are already here. I think our situation with Dreamers, young people whose parents came here, many of them have never even lived in the countries that their parents came from. They were, born here, brought here really early on and don't even speak the language that some of their countries of origin speak. So, I think that's one of those that we just need a path to citizenship, for folks like that. I've got friends from El Salvador. I've got friends from Honduras. I've got friends from Syria, So I think when we think about the persecuted church overseas, sometimes we're really good at caring about Christians in Syria as long as they stay in Syria, but as soon as they want to come here, we're like, nope, sorry about that, So I think that those kind of contradictions have got to change.
It seems to me like a lot of if you look at immigration as a whole, one of the biggest problems that we've got now is just the chutes and ladders that you have to jump through to be a citizen, in a legal way. It seems like a lot of times that's what nobody's talking about. And it seems to me to be the most important thing is we need a streamlined, easier to follow path to citizenship,
Totally.
So people can be here in a legal way when we know who they are, and we're not, because there are, human trafficking and things like that going on. If we had a more rational way for people to become a part of our society, I think it would alleviate a lot of those problems,
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I don't know anybody that's just saying, well, just throw open the borders, and not have any process. But that's the question is, what does it look like to really create a path to citizenship? And refugees, are one of the most vetted populations out there. So they've also already gone through multiple layers, and there's many that we're ready just to let in because we already know that, what they're escaping and their situations. Yeah, and for me, one of the big questions is I love the scripture that says, perfect love casteth out fear. And I think that what's really at war in our country right now is love and fear. And you start to wonder, what would America look like if our policies, whether it's immigration or guns or, healthcare, like whatever, if it was driven more by love and compassion than by fear. And I saw a study that the Cato Institute put out, and we mentioned this in our Beating Guns book, but they list about a dozen things that are more likely to kill you than an immigrant or refugee. And on that list are things like swing sets, lightning. One of them, a cow is more likely to kill you. And one of my favorites was the vending machine falling on you is more likely to kill you than an immigrant or refugee. But we're conditioned to fear, and I think our rhetoric, especially over the last few years, has been all about fear. And so we got to choose. I think the fear and love are sort of like opposing magnets. They can't occupy the same space. And so we really need to choose choose love over fear.
And another conversation that no one is having right now, vending machine anchors.
Yeah, there you go.
Why can't we bolt these things down? I'm tired of living in a country where I have to worry about a Coke machine killing me.
So Shane, one of the things I think is neat about you, and you mentioned your evangelical brothers and sisters. I as far as I know, you really still consider yourself to be evangelical and kind of hold that title as much as you. I don't know necessarily to what extent, but I think some of the things that you're talking about has been a one of the biggest factors in why so many people are having a hard time staying in the church, when it's not being representative of their moral intuitions and what they understood to be what they learned about the love of God or the person of Jesus and things like that. And maybe it turns out that from what they've experienced, it's hard to trust that there's any power or truth to it, and they kind of keep some of the ideologies, but in a more postmodern light. But you really I appreciate the way that you've kind of stayed in it and continue to preach to and speak to people within that fold. And even the way you talk about Jesus, it's like that's the stuff that we heard growing up. But without some of the drifting away from the message that maybe we would have appreciated in our early 20s and 30s, before a lot of us kind of felt like that just didn't stick for us anymore. So, I think, you mentioned your book, You Beating Guns. And, I know when you put that book out, I want you to speak to kind of the premise of the book, but, and some of the work that you did on the road, because I think what you're doing there is neat. And I want to get into the conversation around it, because gun control is such a difficult conversation in our society right now. Probably, I don't know if it's more difficult than immigrants, but as you stated, it's certainly killing more people than immigrants. So it's probably worth talking about.
Yeah, man. And before we go there, I just want to say in response to the evangelical thing, I can remember back when I was in high school, the DC Talk song. I don't know if anybody knows DC Talk, but they had that song where they played Brennan Manning in the background, this kind of wild writer and speaker, but he passed away. But he said one of the biggest obstacles to Christ is Christians. Who pronounce Jesus with our mouths but deny him with our lives. And it reminds me of the words of Gandhi when he said, he's asking about Christianity, and he said, "I love Jesus. I just wish the Christians acted more like him." So I think my preferred label these days, is red letter Christians, because we're organizing this movement and network of Christians who want a Christianity that looks like Jesus again. And ironically, I think the interesting thing is that one of the best critiques of what's gone wrong in evangelicalism is Jesus. A lot of evangelicals have taken their eyes off Jesus, and then you end up talking about things Jesus didn't talk about, and you don't talk about things Jesus did talk about. And I think that for a lot of folks, what they're rejecting is a version of American nationalism that's trying to camouflage itself as Christianity, but it doesn't really look much like Jesus at all. So, if it's that version of evangelicalism, I'm not interested in it at all. I think it's actually a heresy. But
Yeah.
the word evangelical, the word evangel, means good news. And even though a lot of what we see in the evangelical church doesn't look like good news at all, I still keep going back to Jesus. And I think for a lot of folks, when they reject Trump evangelicalism or this kind of distorted, toxic evangelicalism, it may not be the end of your faith, but it might be the beginning, of something better and more robust and beautiful. So, what we're doing in Red Letter Christians is trying to organize folks that they've dedicated their lives to Jesus and justice, and they're living out kind of a better version of Christianity than we've seen kind of hijack the airwaves. And, so, I think that all that's kind of where I find myself. And I still, am in love with Jesus, despite the shameful and embarrassing things that we Christians have done. Yeah. So, I mean, looking at guns, it was one of those things where I started to see those contradictions even in myself, let alone, like kind of in the larger evangelical church. So I grew up saying I'm pro-life, but I really had a very narrow scope with which I thought about that. It was really only on the issue of abortion. And I think a lot of folks that say that they're pro-life would be more accurate to say that they're pro-birth or anti-abortion. Because when you look at the other issues of life and death, we're often on the wrong side of it. So, for me, I was for the death penalty. I grew up with guns. I grew up hunting, and I love guns. I grew up, my dad was in the military, so I was very pro-military. And then I started seeing Jesus say, love your enemies. And it became harder and harder to reconcile, preparing to kill them.
That throws a wrench in the works.
So, what I'm after is just a more consistent ethic of life that's not just about single issues, but I see a lot of these as interconnected, and to care about life is to say that every human being is made in the image of God. So whether it's police shootings and racial justice, or it's immigration or the death penalty or gun violence, I know that anytime a life is crushed, we lose a part of God's image in the world, and it breaks God's heart.
In preparation for this, to be honest, I've been pretty nervous about this conversation. Sam is still in the church and is, I would say, pretty liberal.
Yeah.
He's one of those wishy-washy Christians like you. I'm out of the church, and I tend to be, I would say I'm center right for most things. Yeah. But guns have been a big part of my upbringing and my family, and I hunt a lot, and I fall into some of your statistics for sure on that you shared in the book. It sounds like just like summarizing like some of how you ended up at just feeling strongly about these things. Like it sounds like your community has been really heavily affected by gun violence over the years.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, it's almost every corner of our neighborhood that we have memorials to shootings. We've got the collective memory of those shootings. And eventually for me, there's just a point where I really resonate with Dr. King when he said, we're called to be the good Samaritan and lift our neighbor out of the ditch. But after you lift so many people out of the ditch, you start to say, maybe we need to rethink the whole road to Jericho. And on this, I'll say this, bro, like I'm actually really optimistic. I mean, even as I have conversations with my family who are still hunters, who still have, shotguns and stuff, that they're, an overwhelming majority of gun owners want to see some basic changes, and are questioning, want to see things like background checks, even like the ghost guns. One of the executive orders that we're seeing now, that you shouldn't be able to assemble a gun without a serial number that no one can trace and be able to use it for terrible things. We need to be able to know where guns come from, and we need to, folks that are domestic abusers, maybe they shouldn't have access to guns. If you're not on a no-fly list, maybe you should be on a no-gun list. So I'm really optimistic that even things like assault rifles, I did a vigil with a whole group of hunters that on their shirt it said, we're hunters against assault rifles because you don't need 10 rounds to shoot a deer. And I think there's some weapons of war that are just designed to kill a lot of people as quickly as possible. And that's what they keep getting used for in our mass shootings. So I don't buy into this idea that if they, we make some minor changes on guns, they're coming for everything, like we're going to overturn the Second Amendment. Nobody's going to be able to hunt or have a, shotgun to keep a coyote away from the sheep or something. I just don't think that.
I think what makes this conversation really difficult for me and a lot of people, that are in my neck of the woods is like, you talked about proximity. Proximity changed a lot of your perspective about some of the things that you thought over the years, Here, I mean, I live in Kansas. Almost everyone I know, my liberal friends and my conservative, they're all gun owners. And probably somewhere between 50 and 70% of those own an AR-15 or an AK-47 or something that falls into that category, and I have 3 of those, and there's it's a tough thing to, I can definitely understand how, people who didn't grow up around guns or people who aren't around the type of gun owners that like I meet and talk with on a regular basis could see us, like high capacity magazines and things like that as just being totally unnecessary and really only designed to kill people, AR-15s in particular. I mean, that's the one that comes up in the news a lot. That's what's been used in the mass shootings and things. Those are that's a big category that encompasses a lot of different things. And I think sometimes maybe people don't realize that like that AR-15 platform is used for a lot of different, I mean, short barrel, long barrel, heavy barrel, folding stocks, like they use them for coyote hunting and pig hunting, and they come in all different calibers and stuff now. Is it like, is there like some specific traits that when you talk about like, quote unquote, like common sense gun control, like, all right, what are some of the specific things about certain firearms that you think kind of put them into a category where you would rather just not see them in private hands?
Yeah, thanks, man. Well, first of all, I appreciate you like having this conversation, and much less like hosting someone that you probably don't agree with on everything.
Well, Sam invited you to.
I was like, Casey, you're probably going to hate me for this, but awesome. I want to talk to this guy. I told him about it after it was confirmed. So
at some point, I'll invite like Sean Hannity's son on here, and Sam will have to sweat it out.
Well, I hope you'll invite me back. I think that could be a good time. But well, let me start just by saying that when I think of, so there's one way that I would approach this as a Christian, like that. I find it really hard to reconcile loving our enemies with preparing to kill them. And so there's a part of this that's rooted in my faith, but then there's a whole nother side of this that I can talk about it as one person's rights, and the Second Amendment. And this is where I would start, man, is when they wrote the Second Amendment, James Madison, the father of the Constitution, he said that liberty can be endangered by the abuse of power, but liberty can also be endangered by the abuse of liberty. That one person's right to own whatever guns they want, wherever they want them, can begin to encroach on another person's right to live. And that's why they put well-regulated in it, and I think even now, as we look at the evolution of guns from shooting a couple of rounds a minute at top, maximum when they wrote the Second Amendment, to where we're at now, where guns have such a massive capacity to do so much harm, that asking questions about the capacity of magazines is a good one. Like I believe that, and zooming out just a little bit, think about cars. Cars aren't designed to kill, but they can be deadly. And so we've done all sorts of stuff to protect people from cars. You have to pass a driver's test. You have speed limits. We have airbags, seat belts, all these things. If you abuse your right to drive a car, then your license can be revoked. And even as technology changes, cell phones, we have like no texting and driving laws. So I think all of these things we've evolved, and we've tried to protect people from being killed by cars. And yet guns are one of the most unevolved industries that's out there. So I think there's things that we could do legally that would help. Like I'm a fan of what's called the one handgun a month law, right? That would limit the amount of handguns one person can purchase in a year to one a month, 12 a year. And you start to go, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, who needs more than 12 handguns in 1 year? And I'll tell you, folks that are selling them on the corner, right? So I think that things like limiting the capacity that one person can do, so much damage on, those are good places to start. And when I'm looking at these statistics, it's like 70%, 80% of gun owners want to see those changes. And I think what we're up against is a group that, in my book, I call the gun extremists, or the folks that just have no compromise on any of these things. And, so I think there's a legal side. I also think that there's like technology. We've got, there's gun safes where you can use fingerprint technology. We've got, ATMs and stuff where you use a fingerprint. There's no reason that we can't have a fingerprint technology on guns that would, I believe, really cut down the number of suicides. It would keep someone from stealing a gun, being able to use it as easily. So, a kid in the house finds a gun, it wouldn't operate it. So I think it's not just legislation, but I think that the place I do begin, bro, is by going, man, we're losing 100 lives every day to guns. That's unprecedented anywhere else in the industrialized world. Like, we're not going to save every life, and people that want to do evil are going to find out ways to do it without a gun. And yet I think we can do better than 100 lives a day. In my lifetime alone, I don't know how old you guys are, but I'm 45. We've had more people killed by guns in America in my lifetime than in all of the wars in U.S. history combined. So I think to that we can do better. I think we can do better than that.
So reading your book, I had to do a lot of self-evaluation, which I'm not a fan of. I didn't enjoy. But
none of us
there was some stuff in there that especially hearing some statistics and stuff, I do agree on. A couple of the things that made a lot of sense. There's a lot of parallels between gun ownership and owning and operating a car. And I think you brought up a couple of them there. I remember in Michigan, and you have to realize, like, if you're not deeply into gun culture and stuff, laws vary state by state a lot. And like when I was in Michigan, any handgun sale had to have a background check. You had to go through the sheriff's department. You had to go get a purchase permit where you left your name and all of that, all your personal information. You took that purchase permit to the person who was selling it. They would sell it to you. There was an exchange of ownership from a legal standpoint. So there was no back and forth trading of handguns, because when we start talking about gun violence, the vast majority of gun violence is handguns, but hands down over anything. Assault rifles get a lot of the hype because, mass shootings and things like that, but almost all of the statistics that you quote are handgun deaths. So there's some things there, like at the same time living in Michigan, like I got really into motorcycles for a while, and I was wheeling and dealing motorcycles all the time. And I remember one year I sold more than 5 vehicles, and it almost got me in trouble because to sell more than 5 vehicles, you had to have like a dealer permit. And, because they want to make sure that you're paying your taxes and things like that on there. Some of the things like that, like you said, capping the number of handguns that you can buy and sell in a year. I don't think that's a bad idea at all. And you know what, if you are a gun trader or dealer or something like that, maybe you should have a license, and we should have some history on you. And we should, if you're a felon or something, maybe that's not a business that you should be in.
Yeah, dude. See, I knew that we'd find common ground on all this. Literally, I'm also living in a house that has, or I'm at my mom's house, and we got guns. My uncle right over here's got a assault rifle. You got a little gun above your head. So it's very
Yeah.
I think we need better conversations like this, because I really do think that we can find some common ground, and there's pieces of this that we that we kind of peel away the layers of in our book. I mean, suicide's a big part of this. 2/3 of gun deaths are suicide, and the reason a gun is a big deal in that is 90% of people who attempt suicide, over 90%, by gun, end up dying tragically. But when you look at other methods of trying to take your own life, 90% of the people who try other methods survive, right? Their first suicide attempt, and they don't go on to commit suicide. And so it's I think some of this is about just like, man, how can we make a safer society? We think of our military service members traumatized by violence. They're taking their lives at almost 1 per hour. It's the largest cause of death of military service members is not combat, it's suicide by their own guns. And so, all of this to me comes out of a place of trying to have a little compassion and to be a little bit more responsible. And some of it is we don't even know things, because there are those gun extremists that have blocked us from even being able to know, for instance, which gun shops are the worst. Because we know that like 5% of gun shops are responsible for an overwhelming number of the crime guns. They're literally selling guns irresponsibly to straw purchasers and things like that. And if we could figure out some of the research, we could hold them accountable, and I think some of that's just like we need to do better, and we can do better. It's not a matter of if we can, but if we have the willpower to stand up to some of the kind of extremist rhetoric that we hear.
That was the surprising part to me too, is like when you talked about gun shops in particular. I mean, you mentioned the shooter shop, if I remember right.
Yeah, that's right. Right around the corner from me in Philly. Yeah.
I got to imagine that this is a small number of stores that are doing this, because every gun store or official gun dealer I've ever done a purchase with has been an absolute stickler about rules and regulations and stuff. And, I probably shouldn't say this. I did try to make a straw purchase at one point and got turned down in Flint. My grandpa wanted this 22 rifle, and the store wouldn't sell to anyone from out of state. And so I was like, well, I want it. And they're like, nah, get lost.
Nice, yeah. I mean, I would like to be able to know, like a Yelp rating or something. Let's have some reviews of the gun shops that are responsible and the ones that aren't, so we can know. And then there's some things that are just, to me, no brainers. Like, some folks don't even know that in many places, you're not even required to report stolen guns, And so it allows some like real wiggle room for gun shops to have guns that are stolen, and stuff like that. So it's just like, man, some of this stuff is not really rocket science. We can do better. So I appreciate your, openness. And I think that there are, a lot of the gun owners I'm talking to, they're really grieved by where we're at, and to me, that's again why, like, I keep coming back to me, this is also about proximity. Sometimes it's not a compassion problem, but it's a proximity problem. And until gun violence has names and faces, some of this doesn't have quite the urgency that maybe it should for us. And that's my own story too. But even, like a AR-15 or one of these guns, like, I see it in the mass shootings, but I will never forget the night that I heard them on my block and ran outside, and we had 2 people that were killed. I mean, it's a wonder there weren't more people killed. But then the police began to pick up, look at the shots, and we had 39 shots in like a minute. And so, I everywhere in the world, there are people who have mental health issues. There are people who are violent. But what's unique about our country is we're allowing almost anyone to have this nearly unrestricted access to carry out, horrific crimes and evil. So, and so I think we got to start by grieving the lives that are lost.
So I live in the state of Massachusetts, which is one of the more, I don't know, as a state, we regulate probably more than others, certainly more than Kansas. And, for the people in my life I know who are gun owners, there's a lot of I've heard frustration or just general complaining about the red tape they have to go through to get it and all these kinds of things. I don't think that's more recent too, because I grew up in a home that had guns. I shot rifles when I was a kid. My dad would take us to the shooting range, and I thought it was entertaining enough. Me and my brother never really gravitated towards it or found an interest in it ourselves, but every once in a while we end up at a shooting range where you'd shoot different things. Like, I went to Montana, and, that was the first time I shot a varying degree of weapons into a mountainside, because they're the only people who lived on this mountain. And you're just like, I saw a little bit more of a world that I'm not used to seeing. But in an area like Massachusetts, where it does feel like there's more regulation. I'm personally not super familiar with what all the regulations are. But some of the concerns and the complaints that you hear are, look, we want to own these guns, so we're clearly jumping through all the red tape to get them. And the people I know generally treat them properly and put them up properly. And so they get the frustration then becomes, there's plenty of access to weapons illegally. So there's always that conversation of the more regulations you put on weapons, given the amount that are circulating in this country and how many exist, trying to have the conversation around whether or not that would solve any problems. Because like I said, the people I know, they're not the ones going out shooting people or doing unsafe things with guns. So, but the ones who are the ones who might not be going through the red tape that they're going
criminals
through.
aren't going to obey the rules,
Right.
sort of thing.
So where do we go from there? I guess what's your thoughts on that and that type of a response?
Yeah. So I think that's the delicate dance in any policy issues, is what are the guardrails that you need to kind of keep cars on the road, and what gets too much that you can't even drive right. And I think that's always the endless kind of thought on it on most political issues. And
sure, yeah.
Yeah, I guess where I would say on this is that I think we can have better guardrails on guns in America, and still people have the right to have hunting rifles and things like that. Even I'm not even one that's going to say like I think we should get rid of all handguns or something like that. But I do think that having some limits is really helpful. And even Justice Scalia, who passed away in the Supreme Court, one of the most conservative justices, said even our ruling on guns in I think it was 2008, where the Supreme Court made it clear that the right of the Second Amendment was not just for militia groups but for individuals, right? But he said, that doesn't mean you should just be able to have any amount of guns and carry them wherever you want and have any type of gun that you want. Like, there need to be restrictions and limits on this. So I think that that's really helpful to hear from one of the most conservative Supreme Court justices. But I do think it has to happen across the board, because otherwise you have exactly what happens in Chicago. Everybody goes to Indiana to grab a gun, and you can go to Jersey or whatever. So you can, if we don't have some kind of comprehensive gun laws, then it almost, what's happening state to state doesn't really matter. Or even worse, like Philadelphia passed laws that we don't want assault weapons on our streets in the city of Philadelphia. And then the NRA will take those municipalities to court and challenge them and win, right? So they'll sue the cities that pass laws that want to have some sort of like limitations on the type of weapons or whatever we have on our streets. So yeah, I think that's where is exactly what we're doing right now. Having a better conversation on it can help, and finding some things that we agree on. And maybe it's I think some of the things that the Biden administration is doing are good. I think we need more than that. I think we need some research and access to information. We need folks that are profiting off of gun sales irresponsibly to be able to be held accountable. Like if Nerf, this is the irony, you can sue a toy gun company, but you can't sue a real gun company or like a gun shop, that sells guns irresponsibly. So like literally, if Sam, if you shot my eye out with a Nerf gun, we could sue Nerf, but not so with real guns. And even with real distributors, folks that are we know that are selling guns irresponsibly. Gun shops, the gun shows. I went to a gun show when I was writing my book, and literally had folks just lining the way in, selling guns that without any ID or anything. And once you get in the gun shop, they're a little bit more, or the gun show, they're a little bit more strict about it. But even there was a grenade launcher, and I'm talking to this woman, I'm like, this is a grenade launcher, holy Mary, and I said, what do I need to buy that? And she's like, cash and ID. And she said, but the cash is the most important thing, and I just think, man, and my wife's looking for a 410, she's like wanting to look for a 410. And literally in this gun shop, you could not find a 410 hunting rifle. It was just filled with these, assault rifles and grenade launchers and everything else. So I think that's part of the funk that we're in, right?
Yeah. So you've mentioned a couple of times that I want to, I want you to expand on it a little bit if you can, is the roadblocks towards research and learning more about gun death statistics. You mentioned bad shots. So I might have a slightly poor understanding or redacted understanding, but NRA is obviously one of the biggest groups involved in trying to keep things the same or even deregulate more because they would profit off of it. But when you mention these types of roadblocks to studying gun deaths, I'm aware of types of laws that have been passed that have made it difficult for these types of things to be studied, maybe on a federal level, perhaps. I know there's probably some private studies, but what are those? Is that something you can speak to a little bit more and expand upon so people have an understanding of the attempts being made to keep the waters muddied so that way it's more difficult to pass legislation to solve a problem you can't really know enough about?
Yeah, well, it's good. I mean, we're kind of getting in the weeds a little bit, but we go into some real depth on some of these different, and we're not trying to prescribe all the answers. I think we're trying to raise the right questions in our book, and one of those is about the Protection of Lawful Commerce Act, which was passed under George Bush, that didn't allow companies that are making money off guns to be held accountable. So I think that immunity is being exploited, and that's one of the changes I think that makes a lot of sense. But when it comes to research, I mean, you think research is a good thing on almost every issue. We can agree, like cancer research, research on opioids, research on like car safety. It's ways that we just kind of keep evolving, and progressing. And yet, there have been so many restrictions on Center for Disease Control and Prevention that have not allowed it to study gun violence. And those have been very clearly passed by sort of the radical, like NRA, and I want to say when I say the NRA, we say this in our book that the NRA says that they have 5 million members. But what we also have to hear in that is if that's true, that means 95% of gun owners are not a part of the NRA. And in fact, recent studies are showing that a majority of gun owners are finding themselves at odds with the NRA's kind of, uncompromising rhetoric. So I think that's where we go. We want research. We want to know what protects lives. Like, would fingerprint technology help save lives from suicide and other gun deaths? We need some data that has been forcibly removed, that all data has to be destroyed. So that this is all part of the lobbying of some of those, so you imagine if automobile makers halted all research, on car safety, it wouldn't be good, So I think that's just kind of what I'm saying. And I think there's some really clear changes that we can make that would make research more available and would also allow us to trace some of those gun shops that are irresponsible and hold them accountable. It's 15 guns disappear every day from gun shops, 300,000 are stolen, so all of this, I think we need to be able to keep track of it a little bit better.
I think so. Coming from that camp, especially in the past, and even still, I think one of the notions that I have trouble with is like the slippery slope argument. So that is something that is on a lot of gun owners' minds, and that's the motivating factor behind the resistance to a lot of changes. And I think there's some motivation there, which I understand and I can sympathize with. We get into these discussions about high capacity magazines and AR-15 style rifles and all of that kind of stuff. I think the gun owning community's legitimate concern about passing some of these regulations is that slippery slope, in that we pass some sweeping gun control legislation, right? The Biden administration does some sort of executive order, and all of a sudden, like, high capacity magazines are banned, or semi-automatic rifles are banned. What, the concern is like, well, when the next bad thing happens, then what? And I feel like that's where a lot of gun owners, and even myself to some extent, like, I think that there's just, boy, I'm really struggling to put words together here. But like you said, I mean, people who have a mind to do evil are a lot of times going to figure out a way to do it. And when we pass some of these regulations and give up some of the access and stuff that we have to some of these weapons, and the shootings don't stop, or the violence doesn't get better, or we still get these high profile cases where, just awful stuff like the Parkland shooting and stuff. The thought is that it's not going to be enough, and they're going to push further for more regulations, and eventually it's a slippery slope. You're just going to eventually erode some of those rights that we've had for so long.
Yeah, I hear that argument a lot, and I really do believe that part of this has been the rhetoric of the people that are profiting from the absolutely unrestricted sale of guns. I mean, it was Henry Ford that said, if you want to figure out how to end violence, then figure out who's profiting from it. And I don't really think that even looking at the polls of gun owners, even the polls of NRA members that want to see changes, that most people believe that if we limit handguns, if we require background checks, that they're coming for the hunting rifles, or I don't think that's
sure
what most people feel.
But that's not what most of these people are concerned about. I mean, I don't think most of these people are worried that anyone's going to come try to take their bolt action deer rifle. They're concerned that like I said, the vast majority of people I know have an AR-15 of some sort, and they don't want to give it up.
As someone from the other side, and to, I guess, keep the conversation going and maybe generate some, who knows, maybe there's no real, I think the problem is that I think there's so many things that you can do that I think, like Shane was saying, there's so many things you can do where we can pass it. 100%, maybe everyone agrees. Even someone like me, when you think about an AR-15, like, my understanding, you mentioned they can be used for hunting. I feel like for most people, it's like an enthusiast type thing. It's a hobby. It's like hobbyism, like the fun of shooting guns. It's like, we enjoy doing this, and I guess I think one of the thing that like kind of goes off in my mind when I hear stuff like that is always like, it's like stuck a little bit between, and I've said it, I guess, before. I don't know if I've said it on the podcast, but stuck between like some people, like, there's a lot of responsible, like, I'm not worried about what you're doing with your AR-15 in your backyard, Casey. It's really not a concern to me.
Sure.
So being stuck between that, and when you look at what's going on in society and saying, this is why we can't have nice things, when you just, like, at what point does someone's hobby trump someone's right to live, when you just create such an ease of access to it? But I also hear the counterpoint of, if you eliminate access to it, like, they're here and they're in existence. And I mean, our country has, you probably have the numbers to this in front of you, Shane, more guns per capita than anywhere else. So when you're thinking about it from an access perspective versus a personal responsibility and right perspective, I have that balance is a really difficult thing for me to kind of grapple with. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is that tension between, one person's liberty and another person's safety. And, I think when we're looking at our country right now, you mentioned the amount of guns. Like, we've got 100, the newest stats I've seen are 120 guns for 100 people. So we've got more than one gun per person. And yet we have 2/3 of Americans that live without guns, 2/3. And so there's a few people that have a whole lot of guns. There's 3% of our population that almost have half the guns. So, average is 17 or more each. And so, I think that's where we got to kind of find this equilibrium where folks can be grieved by the gun violence and the suicide rate around our country. And I mean, a lot of the guns that we're transforming into garden tools right now are suicide guns. They're guns like a family that the father snapped and, shot himself and shot the wife. And then the family's left with a house full of guns. And we're transforming those and trying to grieve that with them. And so I think that the fact that African-American children are 10 times more likely to be killed than white kids, like all of that it's not kind of getting outside of ourselves, and just going, man, like I don't want gun violence to be the number one cause of death of our kids. Like I don't want, Casey, you may even be able to like use a grenade safely in your backyard. Frankly, I love blowing things up. And so, and yet, like, I think we've got there's some places that you can't even buy fireworks, but you can get guns. And I think that's just one of those things where we got to go, man, we just need to do a little better at protecting people than protecting guns. And there does come a point where there's a delicate dance there, and I really do believe that often we've been better in America at protecting the right to own guns than the right to live in other people's lives that may not be taken by you, but you're kind of that right. I don't mean to bust the Bible out, but there's that scripture that talks about like how one person's freedom can begin to hurt another person. And so we may have the right to do something, and yet there's a part of me that feels like, man, maybe our commitment to loving our neighbor causes us to make some sacrifices. Even with masks, like I would rather everybody just wear a mask because it's a good idea, but like I think loving our neighbor means, you may have the right not to wear a mask, but like maybe it's just a loving thing to do that. And I think we have that same, like, we got this wild contradiction, I don't need a mask to protect me because God will protect me, but I need a gun, So I think there's there's some of that theology, and our religion plays a role in some of this. And I, it breaks my heart that Christians are one of the biggest champions of guns and the death penalty in our country, the highest gun owning demographic, the highest population that's in favor of the death penalty. And I would just think that our sensitivity to life, because we're worshiping a savior who is a victim of violence and, dies with forgiveness on his lips, like that should do something to us. And our sensitivity to the suffering of other people should do something to us, to cause us to be the biggest obstacles to death and violence, rather than kind of the folks that are often on the wrong side of that.
And I think there's like a fundamental disconnect between the sides of the aisle, like in that regard, because on the one hand, like you said, I mean, we should all be invested in reducing gun violence. Gun owners should be the most invested in reducing gun violence. And what you've said so far about, the abuse of freedom is the greatest threat to that freedom. If you want to keep your right to own guns, you should be championing restrictions that keep them out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them, or reduce the number of accidents and stuff that happen in households. But I think where a lot of people would disconnect, I guess, on things is like laying, you attribute a lot of the gun violence to guns themselves, and looking at the studies and stuff like that, like 2/3 of gun violence is suicides. There's a huge percentage of that pie that's left on the other side that's gang and drug related violence and things like that. And I think it's really hard for, I think about like my friends that I know from work that are big gun enthusiasts. It's really hard for them to understand the logic of, guns are what's doing this to people. I mean, do you see the point I'm trying to make? I'm struggling to bring it all together.
I mean, I think a couple of things I hear you saying. One of them is there's folks that say that gun violence is not a gun problem, it's a heart problem. And I really believe it's both. I think that you can't legislate love. No law is going to change someone's heart. I mean, we've already seen people like in the Boston massacre that turned a pressure cooker into a bomb. Like you can find ways to kill people, to use a car as a weapon, drive it into a crowd. But they're, I think in particular, guns are designed to kill, and many of them are designed to do that very, very efficiently. And so, like when we look at mass shootings and even the profile, like this, it is the most acts of domestic terrorism have been done by white men, with guns. It's one of the biggest threats to public safety, especially as we look at our country right now. And so, Martin Luther King, he I think saw racism as both a heart problem and a policy problem. And he said things like, no law can make you love me, but it can make it harder for you to kill me. And I really vibe with that. I think that we needed God. We still need God to change racist hearts. But meanwhile, we also needed Black folks to be able to swim in the same swimming pools and go in the same schools and vote and be seen as fully human. And, some of those same pains I think we see in the around guns. And so we can't ignore the heart problem, and God heals hearts. But I think sometimes we're waiting on God to change laws, and God's given us that power. So we shouldn't just, offer thoughts and prayers after every mass shooting while then dodging the actions that might save lives in the future.
Yeah. There's a lot of common ground, as we've already talked about. I listened to a couple episodes of Dan Carlin's show, where he talked about guns and gun violence, and both of them, the ones that I listened to, were directly after mass shootings. One was after Aurora, Colorado, and the other was after Sandy Hook, and so he was talking about it in regards to those laws. And one of the things that Dan said that I thought was a great point was, he talked about changing the culture around guns and guns accessibility and things, and how big of an impact that can have, which seems like an insurmountable task. But, the example that he gave was drunk driving. He talked about, he's like, hey, when I was a young man, drunk driving was not an abhorrent, sin against the rest of the peaceful public. Like, drunk driving was something that a lot of people did, and you chuckle about, and it was a run of the mill thing that a lot of people did on a regular basis. And through legislation, punishing, really just hammering the people who abuse that freedom, we've not only reduced that number, but we've changed the culture around it to the point where, nobody wants to hear that you're drunk driving. I mean, nobody thinks it's funny.
Yeah.
No one's going to and a lot of people will stand in the way if you think you're going to get in your car after you've been drinking. And I think that to me, I think made a pretty powerful point. And I think where we need to, some of the common ground that we can go with this is how do we change the culture around guns, and how do we do it in a way that punishes people who abuse that freedom that we're talking about? And, you brought up, you had a great chapter about domestic violence in your book, and talked about how the vast majority of, domestic violence that ended in murder, there was a complaint beforehand. There was some sort of interaction with cops where they were called in on a domestic violence complaint. There's a lot we could do there to help prevent some of those deaths, and if you get the cops called on you because you punched your wife, I mean, you should probably forfeit your gun rights for a while. I don't know. I think there's some really good things that we could do there. Like you said, I mean, that to try to decrease the number of senseless instances of gun violence that really, by all accounts, we should be able to prevent.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, man.
Yeah, the culture part of it, I think, is interesting, because you hear people respond to every mass shooting with citing maybe Australia banning all their weapons as an example of what we should do to solve the problem. And typically, I think if you can come up with a solution in 5 seconds and say it in 5 seconds, it's probably not going to work. But it's when you think about culture and constitution and the mentality around guns in our country, it is way different. As far as I know, I've never really been to Australia, so I could just be totally full of it. I mean, it is a big part. I mean, it is part of our Constitution. It just depending on how you interpret it, I guess. I know there's a lot of conversation around what it means, and even throughout, even before the Second Amendment, we had gun control legislation. We've had it through that, and up through 2008, like you said, Shane, they didn't just open it up to everybody and seal the deal on the conversation. It was it's still open to discussion and regulation. And I think I think your point about culture, I think the culture is changing culture and changing minds about what that looks like, and how people should consider their freedoms versus other people's lives and things. I mean, I think that's such a good point. I really appreciate this conversation, Shane and Casey. Casey, this is easy, right? You were fine.
It wasn't as bad as I thought.
It's been great. It's been great, y'all. Yeah, I think we got to keep thinking outside the box. You know, I mean, there are countries that have made changes that have worked, and there's probably changes that haven't worked. There's things like, we talked about the study in Israel where soldiers just stopped taking their weapons home, and it massively cut down the amount of suicides. I think there's just all these things, but all of it, I think, begins by having a deeper sensitivity to life and going, you know what, let's step back from the rhetoric, from the polarizing stuff, and let's first remember that, all the way back to Cain and Abel, when the first life was lost, a brother killed his own brother. It says that the blood cried out to God from the ground. And so this matters to God, and it should matter to us. It should shake us that we're losing, even in the pandemic, we lost 40,000 people to gun deaths. So start by even just feeling like it pains us. I think the same with drunk driving. Probably more and more people care because more and more people knew someone personally who had been hit by a drunk driver or somebody in their family, and so even if gun violence hasn't personally affected us, maybe kind of keep trying to have a heart to realize, a softened heart to realize that this is affecting so many people. It's over 40% of Americans right now that know someone who's been shot. And so let's not wait till it hits us, right? Or comes to our school or to our own family. Let's try to think about how we can save more lives before it becomes more personal. But thanks both.
Did your wife ever? Yeah. Did your wife ever find a 410? You want me to keep an eye open?
My wife is she's turkey hunting with her dad these days, but no, she's good to go, I think. But I'll let her know if she needs a 410, who to call.
I've been looking for an old 16 gauge side by side, and if I find out you beat one into a shovel, I'm gonna be really upset.
I have to tell you, I just got a mother load of guns, and I do not want to show you all of the ones that. One of them was oh man, what's that? It was I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's one of those really really fancy ones. It starts with a B. Anyway, but and if if you decide you want to. Get rid of one of those assault rifles. I can make you one of these shovels out of it. So
yeah. See, I'd put one of those behind me. If you get a gun above your head and I'd put one of those. Shane, when you get started,
it's what we call a very expensive shovel right there. If it's made out of it,
yeah.
15, so.
You got to start selling those on your website to raise money for Red Letter Christians, man.
Dude, we can't make enough of them. We give one to each gun owner that gives us a gun, and then we can usually make 2 or 3 more, but we're always going through them because we give a lot of them, away. We did have this guy that just won an AR. It wasn't a 15. It was I can't remember. It was like a 500 series or something. It was a big AR gun that he won in a raffle, and then he just was like, this is I don't know, probably $1,500, $2,000 gun. He just said, man, I thought it was going to be a hunting rifle, and so he gave it to us brand new in the box. So I think this is made out of that one there. So, but yeah,
that hurts me a little.
And thanks, Shane. Thanks so much for the conversation. This was a great time. We really appreciate you and your time. Well, I appreciate you. Casey's coming around.
No, it was great to meet you, man.
Appreciate both of y'all. Let's do it again sometime. Bless you. Cool.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
We will catch you next time.